Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, may the Divine be pleased with him, was the best friend of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, before the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, started to receive revelation, as well as after the Prophet, peace be upon him, started to receive revelation. Him and the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to understand each other very well. As a matter of fact, at the end of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and you can imagine how difficult it is for somebody to farewell their best friend. Many incidences happened between Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with him, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. One of them, just to show that very deep understanding. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was standing one Friday, and he was delivering a sermon. So in Islam, every Friday, the Imam or the spiritual leader will stand in the mosque and will deliver a sermon, two sermons, and then will pray the noon prayer, a shortened version of the noon prayer. So the Prophet was standing and he was delivering a sermon. And usually when the sermon is being delivered, everybody is quiet, nobody is allowed to say anything. If somebody was to say something, it has to be for an emergency or to direct it directly to the Imam, to the spiritual leader. So the Prophet was standing there and then he said something. He said, إن عبدا خيره الله أن يؤتيه من زهرة الدنيا أو جواره فاختار ما عند الله أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he said that there is a slave of God, of the Divine, that was given the choice between being given from the pleasures of this life, from the flowers of this life, or to be with God, to be with the Divine. And that slave of God chose to be with the Divine. Now, to somebody who is listening to this, it can sound like an advice to people to choose to be with God instead of choosing this materialistic physical life. Now, the reality, though, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was speaking about himself. At the end of the Prophet's life, the objective of his life was achieved. The message of Islam was grounded in this world, and people knew what it was. It was time for the Prophet, peace be upon him, to move on. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, as we know from the biography about him, the angel Gabriel came to him, giving him that choice from God. Now, this we know about this choice that he was given later on at his death time, in his deathbed. However, the Prophet, peace be upon him, delivered this sermon, and he stated that he was given a choice, and he chose to be with God. Now, who understood this? The only person that understood that the person meant by this story is the Prophet himself was his best friend Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. May Allah be pleased with him. And he was so emotional, he stood up during the Friday sermon, and he started talking to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a very loud way. And he was saying that فَدَيْنَاكَ, like we are willing to sacrifice ourselves for you, O Prophet of God. So people looked at Abu Bakr and they said, what's up with him? Like, why is he standing up and speaking like that to the Prophet, peace be upon him? And they said that, the Prophet is saying this general advice and he's, standing up and responding in a way that doesn't make sense. Now, what it really turned out to be at the end of the day is that Abu Bakr understood the Prophet, peace be upon him, more than anybody else. And when the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed on, who was the most steadfast and the most strong in remaining sound and really intellectual at that moment, it was Abu Bakr. Most of the other companions, they were very sad. Some of them, they couldn't believe the Prophet passed on, because they pretty much changed their life around this message and around the personality and the figure of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now, when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq came to take over the leadership. And it's a long story that we explained in another video. And people really kind of forced him into that leadership position, which he didn't want. But they elected him and they nominated him and they forced him, like, there's nobody else that's going to take it. You're going to have to take it. So he took it, and it was not easy. It was not easy time. The people of the Arabian Peninsula, they had certain norms, certain cultural norms. And these cultural norms, they did not have enough time to live with the Prophet, peace be upon him, to change it. And they had a lot of what's called the diseases of the heart, especially in the leadership. In the leadership of the various tribes, many people wanted to take advantage of this opportunity that the Prophet died, the leader died, hence the Muslims got weak, and hence what we're going to do is that we're going to take over this kingdom, or this ruling that the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Muslims have built. Now, this ruling that was built, this kingdom over the Arabian Peninsula, I wouldn't call it even a kingdom, but this establishment of the Islamic system that happened, it didn't just happen because of the people, it happened due to divine intervention. So those people didn't even comprehend the understanding that something that was established due to metaphysical, spiritual, divine intervention cannot be beaten simply by physical means. So they started, creating these coalitions to basically wipe out the Muslims. And one of the very first things that they have started is that many of them said, we are not going to be paying the zakah. The zakah is the purifying alms. This is a type of charity that every Muslim pays every year on his or her wealth. It's about 2.5% of the amount of money that the person saves over the year, if that amount passes a certain threshold. So every year, a Muslim would count his or her money, and then they would take out 2.5%, and they would give it in the path of, or in the channels that are indicated for the specific charity. So there are 8 channels. Some of them are the poor people. Some of them are the people that don't have enough sustenance. Some people that have debt on them. There are 8 different categories of people that can receive this type of charity. So these people, they said, you know what? Now the Prophet died. We used to give him this charity, and he used to distribute it amongst people. We really don't have to do it anymore. Now, this is a huge issue because the zakah is one of the 5 pillars of the faith, of the ritual aspect of the faith, the practices in Islam, which means that if somebody takes that ritual out, then the pillars, one of the 5 pillars, would have fallen, and then the whole faith would fall. They would start with the zakah, and then they would continue on and on to a bunch of other things. So they started with that, and Abu Bakr said, no, this is not something that I can allow. This is something the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to receive, and now me as a leader of the Muslims, I'll still receive it from you, and I will distribute it like the Prophet, peace be upon him, distributed it amongst the people. And they actually spend a lot of time negotiating. They have sent many people from various tribes to negotiate with Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr refused. And when they got to the point saying, okay, well, we cannot convince him, they said, we're going to fight him. So we're going to wipe out the Muslims because of this pillar that they are refusing to let go of. Now, this is such a major mutiny in the Arabian Peninsula because it wasn't just one tribe or 2 tribes. It was the majority of the people, the absolute majority of the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. On top of that, many people have seen that prophets, being a prophet of God, is a very profitable business. They looked at it from a materialistic perspective. And they said, okay, well, this is a very profitable endeavor, so let's claim we are prophets. And these false prophets started to pop up in the Arabian Peninsula from every direction. And they became so powerful. They have gathered around them many tribes and many supporters of people that still didn't build that allegiance to the divine. They still haven't built that spirituality. They haven't cleansed their hearts from the attachment to this physical world. And each prophet would pop up and would, come up with some weird commandments. One of them, what he did is that he said, okay, I'm a prophet of God and I'm receiving divine revelation, and my sign of prophethood, or my contribution to prophethood, is that you do not have to prostrate in prayer. So the Muslims, when they pray any prayer, majority of the prayers, there is bowing and prostration to God. So there are physical movements on top of the vocal rituals. And he said, okay, well, we don't have to prostrate anymore. So this is this guy's contribution. Another guy's contribution, he decided to become a prophet, and all of a sudden another woman comes up and she also wants to claim prophethood, and then they want to get married. So a prophet getting married to a false prophet. It's just a gong show. And he said, okay, she asked him, well, what is my dowry? He said, okay, well, your dowry, I'm a prophet, your dowry is that, well, we don't have to pray the 5 daily prayers. We're going to drop a couple of these 5 daily prayers. So that's your dowry. So she said, okay. And they both know that they're lying. And the people, a lot of the people around them, they know that they're lying. And they're celebrating this, and they got them married off. And now Abu Bakr, the caliphate at that time, after the Prophet, peace be upon him, he was dealing with, basically, from a physical analysis perspective, it's an impossible mission. And add on top of that, the surrounding nations. There were the Persians and the Romans and a bunch of other nations. They've realized that the Muslims have become a power. And the Arabian Peninsula, anyway, it didn't have much. It was just a desert and a bunch of tribes that used to fight amongst themselves. But then the Prophet, peace be upon him, came and he settled all these differences. And now it's a united nation. So now that's something that bothers the Romans and the Persians. So those guys started preparing armies, and they're like, okay, they were waiting for the death of the Prophet. And when the death of the Prophet, the news came to them, all right, time to send the armies. So now you don't just have internal mutiny and internal turmoil, you also have external grievances and external enemies that want to come in and continue in this massacre. They want to contribute to this mess, and they want to continue wiping out the Muslims. And that's not everything. Not just the people that are enemies to Abu Bakr and the Muslims were against him. Even the Muslims themselves, they tried to convince Abu Bakr of things based on their, again, physical understanding of this world. For example, the Prophet, peace be upon him, prepared an army to send it up north, to send it to protect the people from the north, and to attack an enemy that was coming from outside of the Arabian Peninsula. And when the Prophet died and this internal mutiny happened in the Arabian Peninsula, even Umar ibn al-Khattab, who was the second caliph, and he is one of the most strong companions that had ever existed. And he was even called Al-Faruq, the divider. He divides between truth and falsehood. That's how strong he was. He was trying to convince Abu Bakr, do not send this army out. And Abu Bakr is saying, guys, how do I stop something that the Prophet himself put in motion? Now remember that Abu Bakr understands the Prophet, peace be upon him, the most amongst all the companions, because he was the companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He is the one that traveled with him. He's the one that was most supportive of his message, and he learned the most from the Prophet, peace be upon him. So when the Prophet does something, Abu Bakr has a different perspective than most of the other companions. Yes, the other companions definitely have that strong belief and that strong divine presence, But Abu Bakr has even a higher level of that. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that the faith of Abu Bakr, if it was put on one side of the scale, it will tip the belief of the whole nation, of the whole Muslim nation. And that's because Abu Bakr lived with the Prophet, peace be upon him, moment by moment, and he saw what it means to have that strength of the divine. So not only Umar ibn al-Khattab tried to oppose that, many companions tried to oppose that. And then he kept telling them, what do you want me to do? To stop something that the Prophet put in motion? And they said, no. And then eventually they were convinced. So he sent this army, which had kind of the majority of or a good number of the strong companions that were supposed to protect Medina. Medina is the headquarters of the Muslims, the capital of the Muslims. So he sent it out. Now eventually that had a very positive impact, because when the tribes saw this army going to defend against the Romans, they said the nation of Islam cannot be weak when it is sending an army to fight the biggest kingdom and the biggest empire that exists outside. So they all came back, like all those tribes that were on the routes that the army walked on or walked through. They all came back and they said, okay, no, we're not gonna, we don't think we can take advantage of this time, because clearly the nation is strong. So that was the companions saw that when the Prophet put something in motion, there is something good that's going to come out of it. But it still wasn't easy, because the people that were coming to meet, those delegations that were coming to meet Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, trying to convince him to let go of the purifying alms, the zakah, they saw weakness in Medina, because Abu Bakr decided to send these armies out to those different tribes and those different false prophets to deal with them and address those issues. And the Medina was left with like barely any men that can protect it. Now the story is very long of how Abu Bakr built that war room, the kind of the operation room, and he started to manage this like almost you can think of it as, in today's world, if you are in the military and you're managing a huge operation and you have very limited resources and you need news to come in very quickly and you need to send it out very quickly. And he had with him there some of the top generals and the top military thinkers from the Muslims. Like he had Khalid ibn al-Walid, who Khalid ibn al-Walid defeated the Muslims before he accepted Islam in the Battle of Uhud. He's the one that strategized with Quraysh and waited for the moment to strike the Muslims, and he did, and the Muslims were lost, just like we explained in another episode. So he had him with him, he had Umar al-Khattab, and then everybody else was just, acting as messengers, and they were in different small brigades and platoons that were going out and managing these affairs. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with him, he had to deal even with a strategy of trying to protect the people that were still with the Muslims, but their tribes, the leadership of their tribes, they committed mutiny against the Muslims. Now the leadership, when they saw some of those people from their tribe still with the Muslims, they slaughtered them. They tortured them, they slaughtered them. In some stories, they brought these people that were still believing in the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they literally chopped them like one limb at a time. And those people start to send to Abu Bakr like, what do we do? Like, we're being massacred here. So imagine Abu Bakr doesn't just have to deal with protecting the Medina, the capital of the Muslims, doesn't have to only protect from the external enemies, the Romans and the Persians, and doesn't only have to protect from the internal affairs and the enemies and the false prophet, he has to also protect those people that were being massacred by their own tribes. It was really, really, really tough time. And Abu Bakr governed for about 2 years and 2 months. And basically those 2 years and 2 months were trying to stabilize the nation again. And he did. He did stabilize the nation. All those enemies were defeated, and it was again united. The nation was united again. But he set precedents of what it means to be a leader. Because prophethood is finished by the death of, or by the passing on of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Everything after that is not divine. Everything after that is human thought, is human understanding, is human application. But how do we understand and how do we derive rulings of governance? And how do we deal with such dilemmas that are striking the nation of Islam? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the time he spent, those 2 years and 2 months, they set precedents for all the caliphs that came after him. And his contribution to Islam in stabilizing the nation of Islam and in actually carrying the legacy of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is unprecedented and will never be repeated ever again in the history of this world. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next episode.